business level and on a personal level, and that's Melissa for me, for sure. So my name is Laurie Canepa. I'm based in that pivot, and I think candidates are a little bit behind on that when we talk to candidates. And I tell them, like, it's fine if you want to be 100% remote.
Huge number, I think, for people looking.
I mean, that's going with what the LinkedIn editor said. I mean, I'm just saying.
Where things are wrong, and I think you nailed it. It's
Contact information and go back there. Make it pretty easy for me to find you. So when you click on contact information, whatever you're comfortable with.
Welcome to the Executive Connect podcast. I'm so excited to have my friend Laurie Canepa here today to talk about your jobs, the job industry, the market. Laurie, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Great. It's so great when you get to connect with someone on a business level and on a personal level, and that's Melissa for me, for sure. So my name is Laurie Canepa. I'm based here in Austin, Texas. Started my career out in public accounting, and then morphed into a controller role in industry, and then stepped into the world of executive search almost 18 years ago. So I specialize in executive search that goes all the way up through the C-level. Specifically, my niche is in accounting and finance. Stephen Douglas, who I work for, is a 40-year-old brand based out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I was their flagship employee a little over 2 years ago, that they hired in Austin to expand their presence into Texas. In that time, we now cover Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, and Houston, and we've actually worked our way up to be in the top 5 for both executive retained search and for contingency search in this market. So we're not function specific, we're function specific, we're not industry specific. So we cover all genres, and we also have a national presence. We cover over 25 different markets. And even though I'm accounting and finance, we also work in other verticals as well as information technology, supply chain, human resources, legal, and then we also have an interim resources group as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Laurie. Excited to have you here today to talk about recruiting. So from your perspective, what market trends have you observed that are significantly impacting recruiting of executives today?
I'd say the biggest thing in the ongoing conversation is flexibility, right? So flexibility, I think in this world, are we talking about remote jobs? Are we talking about hybrid? Are we talking about on-site? And which level of a role is embracing which side? I would say 2 years ago, if you dialed back our remote jobs, the dynamic of those jobs has drastically changed. If you pulled up our sheet that said 100% remote jobs, there were a lot of C-level leadership jobs. That has changed. And that was really out of necessity, right? So that has now changed, I think, just because we no longer have that pandemic attached to it as well. But I also think that companies have quickly realized, for the most part, that there is something to say for some type of face time in creating cohesive culture, some type of camaraderie, everybody kind of being on the same page. Collectively in the Austin area or in Central Texas, I'd say everybody's embracing the hybrid. There are some that are going on site every day, but I'd say, hybrid 3-2 or 4-1. I always advise companies that are kind of resistant to the hybrid. Like, I always look at flexibilities earned, like baby step, try one day, see how that works for everybody, right? But the dynamic of those C-level roles, like I said, has changed. If you look at our remote roles now, there are more individual contributor roles. They're more plug and play roles like technical SEC reporting, anything related to tax. So I think, if anything, candidates have to catch up a little bit on understanding that you can't just have that. If you want a leadership, you have to choose. Do I want a leadership position and be highly compensated, or compensated what I think is fair for my skill set? Or is being 100% remote more important to me? Because there's going to be a trade-off. There just is. And I'd say, like I said, 2 years ago, that was totally different. And if anything, I think employers are a little bit ahead of kind of making that pivot. And I think candidates are a little bit behind on that when we talk to candidates. And I tell them, like, it's fine if you want to be 100% remote, but are you going to have that leadership, C-level, high growth opportunity of an impact position? Not so much.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm wondering, like, are there specific industries that are in, like, is there a sector that has a heightened demand for top executives right now that you're recruiting for?
Ready to lead smarter and invest wiser? On the Executive Connect podcast, we unpack executive strategies for wealth and influence. Hit the subscribe button now. Don't just watch, act.
I mean, I think so if we dial it back to 2008, right, where we cut across the board, like nobody was hiring, there was no PPP loan bailout, right? So companies were like trying to stay more cash centric. So they were cutting from the top up, and it wasn't industry specific, it was across the board. If you look now, it's definitely, like I said, it depends on the industry, right? And, there's going to be certain industries in 2024, just like 2023, that are going to be more married to interest rates, economy. So I think it really just depends on the industry and how that's flourishing. I'd say retail, banking, especially those consumer more facing positions tend to, it's an emotional roller coaster depending on the market's going. Technology, it just depends on the vertical you're in. I mean, I have one technology company here specifically, they've got a multi-billion-dollar valuation and 65% profit margins. And then I have another one that's drastically struggling. So I wish there was like more of a black and white answer to that. But I would say if I look historically over the CFOs and CAOs I've placed over the last 6 months, they're everything from consumer products to, and it depends on where the position sits as well, like which companies are sitting in the cloud, which is technology driven. We just we work in banking and financial institutions. We work in startup bank here in Austin. So I'd say it's a little bit all over the map. But again, me being in the Central Texas market might be a little bit different than some other areas of the country. I'd say from an economic perspective, my office out of all of our 25 different locations has been by far the busiest, I would say. And I don't think it's because I'm so awesome. I mean, my team's awesome, but I'm just saying, but I think it's because we are lucky to be in Texas. There's more companies coming here than leaving here. I think that we create a lot of, I think not just because companies know it's for a lot of reasons. I think cost of doing business, regardless of all the things we hear about it being more expensive. I mean, at the end of the day, we have no income tax. Global companies like this location just purely because of our time zone. I know that's silly, but really it is. Because think about it, if you have APAC responsibilities and you've got people on the East and West Coast, well, if you have someone right in the middle, that way it's not, it's kind of somewhere in the meeting in between. So I think, we still have a lot of people, people coming here than leaving here, really. I mean, for the most part. And then from hiring perspective, I was just listening to the editor of LinkedIn. LinkedIn, 85% of people in 2024 are passively seeking a new role. That's up 27% from last year. Yeah. So when you talk about, and we're not talking about unemployed people, we're talking about employed people, which makes the market, to long answer to your short question, incredibly tight. And I think everyone gets drawn into we hear RIFs, yes, but look at those companies. Those are the very large global publicly traded companies that, from my perspective, overhired and overpaid post-pandemic. There's a very, very large company that we all know in the social media space, multi-billion-dollar company. When they came back from pandemic and people didn't want to come back to work, they were like kind of almost in panic mode. Oh my gosh, we need people. And people don't want to come back. So they don't even ready to work yet. They're still in like this PTSD from the pandemic. So they were hiring and they were paying like 30% over market. And that's across the board. So some of this is really level setting, but no one ever talks about that. Right? It's the media pulling into the gloom and doom. But it's a lot of it's level setting. I mean, even just a point of reference here in Austin, in my world, senior accountants is a simple example. For competitive salary, will make somewhere between 90 to 110. And that's like a big four CPA candidate type. This particular company and some of their competitors, the large global publicly traded company, were paying somewhere between 130, 135. So if you think about it, now they're looking at where they're going in 2024. Now they have a chance to breathe a little bit and they're looking around, especially in my role, which are non-revenue generating positions. So looking at that and saying, okay, well, we overpaid, we've got to cut there a little bit and we overhired. Now in the Austin market, it kind of kept us honest because most of our companies here are somewhere between 50 to 350 million or PE or VC backed. So, Ps and VCs were like, yeah, that's cute, but we're not paying senior accountants $135,000, right? So it kind of kept us honest, which I think also works to our advantage, what is why we don't sit. I would say if you look at some areas of the country, as far as like our unemployment rate and things like that is pretty low here.
85% is a huge number, I think, for people looking.
I mean, that's going with what the LinkedIn editor said. I mean, I'm just saying, he's supposed to be the market expert.
Right? So true. And that
was yesterday, actually. Yeah.
Wow. That's a huge number. And when I think of like LinkedIn as well, everything's pretty clear, pretty posted of what the job is, what the salary is, if it's remote or hybrid. But when you're working with candidates and matching them with compensation for these roles, are there specific negotiation tactics that you use so the employer's not overpaying and the employee's getting the right pay?
Yeah, I mean, I think always being honest and transparent on the front end is always really important, right? Like, when I talk to a candidate, and this is more of my perspective, often I'll ask them, in Texas, legally, I can still ask you what you're making, right? I can ask you, now that may change down the road. There's other states you cannot, unless they'd like to volunteer that. But for me, in order to best help you, I really need to know what your overall compensation package is, just so that, I need to know your bases. What's your bonus? What's it tied to? What's your incentive comp? Pre-IPO equity or pre-event equity is always hard to evaluate. I know that, but how fully are you vested in those kinds of things? And I think that's just a really good starting point. I know sometimes people are reluctant to share that because they feel like they're underpaid or those kind of things. But again, in my world, I'm kind of like your agent, right? So I'm up to kind of like negotiate that, like, hey, here's Melissa. This is her current compensation. Because in Texas, you're still have to go to fill that on a job application. So why are we like, let's just lay all the cards on the table, right? But I know her and I know her industry, and she's definitely paid 10% before market. So even though this is her current overall compensation package, this is what her target is. Candidates often like to give me ranges too. I always tell them that's really cute, but companies don't pay in ranges. So I love that you're open to the range, right? But like, let's talk about what that actually means, right? So, and then the same is, your bonus, did your bonus pay out historically? But one of the things that I talk about, I just give a seminar to the Job Seekers Network here in town is, when you're talking about negotiating compensation, you remember honesty on the front end, but we want to really you want them to fall in love with you first, right? You're going to have so much more negotiating power when they are like, not in like with you, but then when they are in love with you. And you've had enough conversations to get them to know you so that you're a little bit of a proven entity. Starting right out of the gate with like saying, hey, this is what I'll take or I won't take, with like kind of this ultimatum is just like never a good approach anyways, because then you're just going to be, clients at the end of the day want to know you're running to something, not from something, right? And so at the end, even if you really are running from something, but they want to know that you're looking for a career and not a job, right? And so I think part of it is really knowing when to really understanding when it's time to have that compensation conversation and not shooting yourself in the foot either way. Like coming in, you don't want to undervalue your stuff, yourself, but on the flip side, you don't want your salary and your compensation to become so overly like that's just a focus that they're missing out on everything else about you. And there's a time and date to do that. I mean, a time and day to do that, but you have to be really strategic about when you do that in the process. And often it's not as hard to explain as people think. Salaries are tied to revenues, and so, I mean, at the end of the day, so for instance, if I'm talking to someone from Dell who likes the idea of working in a pre-revenue, early stage, $10 million funded startup, well, if you're making $200K at Dell, like that's probably not happening, so there has to be a little bit of a trade-off. I'm not saying that you don't have to make something that's competitive and everybody's financial situation is different, but you're going to have to know that it's not apples to apples, right? I mean, everything from a benefits perspective. And I do a lot of that. I mean, the majority of the companies here in town, for the most part, are not, we only have 50 publicly traded companies here. So they say. I'd love somebody to actually count those, but 50 publicly traded companies here in Austin. And so the most companies are not on the larger side of compensation, but I think it's just really understanding and then asking away. It's amazing to me how often C-level executives that I talk to in my world, it's CFOs, it's CAOs, it's VPs of finance that get into a company and say, I didn't know my equity was tied to that, or I didn't know that my equity was really worth that, or I didn't know it vested annually. I just assumed it vested quarterly. I think they're afraid to ask the question because they feel like they'll come across like, uneducated or not knowing how to, because they're a numbers person. And especially if you're coming from a company where you've never had that type of equity, because there's so many, I'd love, in my world, I wish clients would share their cap. Nobody's sharing their cap table with me. Okay. Like no one, right. Because that would be a much easier conversation for me to negotiate. So I think as a recruiter, I also have to know when I step out of the process, because clients will share with me enough, but often, so there's no miscommunication, or, miscommunication about the valuation, I usually let C-level execs have that conversation. I'd say I've seen here in Austin C-level, I've seen a little bit of a mix most recently. A lot before, there'd been a lot more of like number of option, number of shares. And most recently I've seen a trend more towards percentages. Typically my CFO roles usually are as percentages in anything at the chief accounting officer or CFO level. But again, you've got to know, what does that percentage mean? Like, what's the outstanding shares? What's the vesting schedule? What's the dilution? Like, knowing all those things. And unfortunately, clients often don't share that much with me. They share with me enough. Like, they call it meaningful equity, which meaningful equity does. And when I tell candidates meaningful equity, we mean there's an exit or some type of like planned exit, depending upon if it's VC, PE backed, are we doing an IPO? Because, there's companies I work with here in Austin, been doing this for 18 years, that have been telling me they're pre-IPO for 10 years. So let's talk about how meaningful that equity is. It's not. It feels good, but it's not.
I think you touched on a really good point. I wanted to circle back on. There's the resume that has the information to get you the interview. Mm-hmm. And there's the actual interview, which are completely separate things. I know I've read resumes many times, and I've been hiring for many years, where it says attention to detail. And there's like grammatical errors all the way through their resume, or things are wrong. And I think you nailed it. It's, you got to find it's a DNA fit for you, and it's a DNA fit for the company. And they got to fall in love with you. You have better negotiating power when it works both sides. And, I always, when interviewing people, I a lot of times look at the resume, but I don't interview a ton off the resume, because it gets you the job interview, but what gets you the job is your personality and what you're going to do for that company.
Absolutely. And I think okay, go ahead, Rose. Go ahead.
And so I was going to kind of switch gears a bit. We talked about money, and I know you touched on it a little bit at the beginning, was LinkedIn. Personal branding and your professional networks are starting to become huge on LinkedIn. So when you're interviewing for roles, do you look at, really how pivotal is branding professional networks for executive candidates looking to stand out and differentiate themselves for a position?
This episode is sponsored by Texas Freedom Fund. If you're an accredited investor looking to protect your purchasing power, reduce taxes, and own real Texas energy assets, listen up. The Texas Freedom Fund invests in proven oil and gas projects in the Eagle Ford Shale with no debt and strong tax advantages like intangible drilling costs applied against active income. Minimum investment is $25,000 and the sponsor invests right alongside every single deal. Learn more at texasfreedomfund.executiveconnectpodcast.com. Energy, opportunity, and Texas grit working for your portfolio.
It's huge. And, today's LinkedIn, tomorrow might be do something different, right? But LinkedIn is the go-to, right? And I would say, hiring managers or my clients are looking for any reason to rule you out. So don't give them that reason. I know a lot of my hiring managers, whether we start with, my preference is to work directly with a hiring manager, but often sometimes with larger companies, we have to go through, internal recruiting, HR. The first thing they're doing is taking this resume and they're going to see if it matches your LinkedIn. And it does tell them, you may say, well, I'm not into social media, I'm LinkedIn, but it tells them a little bit about how tech savvy is this person, right? I know that maybe they're not spending all day on LinkedIn, but they're not on LinkedIn because it's something they're afraid of or don't want to post, or they literally want to match to make sure that your resume is identical to what's on LinkedIn. If it's not, it's back to the attention to detail, how important is. And I think for them, even if we're talking about C-level execs, when they're hiring you, they're hiring your network too, right? So if they hire you, Melissa, they're going to say, well, okay, so let's say they're working with me. They're like, we paid a fee for Melissa, but hopefully we don't pay a fee for the next 4 or 5 because she's going to bring people that she knows and that she trusts. So that's part of it too. And people don't think that far ahead, but really when they're looking not only, and does that person really kind of well-known in their own like in their own, are they subject matter expert and respected by their peers in their space? So yes, in LinkedIn, and don't think they're not looking at your other social media either. Like, trust me, I tell candidates when you're interviewing, I know you have things hidden, but remember who your audience is and remember what's out there. Remember what you comment on and what you don't comment on. LinkedIn, Facebook, yes, it's a personal vertical, a personal platform. I get that. But be very, very careful on LinkedIn what you actually like, what you comment in, and how you do that in a way. We're not saying don't be authentic. We're not saying don't do yourself, but don't give a potential employer a reason to rule you out. When it comes down to that very close race between 3 and 4 candidates, 2 and 3 candidates, it's just they're just looking for little small reasons to say, you know what, I saw Laurie commented on something and I don't know if that would really fit in here. And Melissa didn't really do that. So that's going to be, I like both. They can both do the job. Well, that's going to be my deciding factor. I know it sounds so simple. I mean, it sounds so silly, but it really is. So really branding and being authentic on there and commenting on things that you feel like they want to see you comment on things relevant to their, to your world and to your audience. They want to see how up to speed you are, especially if you're in a technology space like you are, Melissa, like really making, I see your posts all the time, right? You're always up to speed on the newest and the latest. And even if you're not really sure about it, you're like, what do you think? Right? Like, so I think it also tells a lot of people about your communication, your ability to engage. If you go up there, even in my world, I'm in accounting finance. If I go up there and I see someone's LinkedIn profile and there's no photo and they have like 2 connections, because there are fake profiles out there, right? There just in like any space. And so that also makes me think like, okay, like, again, it just tells people, and how serious are you really about your career search? But LinkedIn is really, it's a very, and being part of other groups and networks, but yeah, it's a long answer to a short question, but it's really important.
It's really good. I think I agree. Like, I've looked at resumes and the resume said they've been at a company for 8 years. I go on their LinkedIn and they've had a new job every year for 8 years, right? So it makes you question, are these people honest? Are they transparent? Right. And so I think it does, you're right, it does leave different nuggets of information when you're an interviewing manager. So for executives that are looking to stand out for jobs, is there anything they could be doing on LinkedIn? Like anything you suggest that they do on LinkedIn, or maybe secondly, anything they could do for their own brand that helps them get jobs?
I think C-level execs, it's about being consistent, right? Because there is, we have the luxury of having this incredible technology team. Yes, I'm going to give a prop to Dave Burleson. Woo-hoo. He does this incredible, he has done a deep dive on algorithms within LinkedIn. So we actually have this incredible profile about posting, when to post, times to post, how many more views you're going to get, like all these kind of things, because there is a rhyme to that, right? Like you're going to get more looks, you're going to get more views, and you're always going to get that if you're consistent, right? I'd say on average, just even if you're in a job search or you're a hiring manager, to be relevant on LinkedIn, you've got to touch it at least 3 or 4 times a week, at least at a bare minimum, right? And it's got to be something relevant to your audience, like in tagging companies, but branding, a picture that's my world, conservative, easily accessible. If you really want, if you're really out there and you're actively looking, make it easy for someone to contact you. Don't make me have to go through LinkedIn Recruiter to find your contact information and go back there. Make it pretty easy for me to find you. So when you click on contact information, whatever you're comfortable with, like maybe you don't want to advertise your cell phone number out there, but at least put an email or something in your contact information so I can easily find you. And then remember, when you're doing searching through LinkedIn, whatever your title that you're looking for, that's got to be in your header somewhere, right? Because that's what they're pulling up, right? Whether it's, like if I'm looking for like a SaaS CFO, like, if I pull up SaaS CFO, the ones that say SaaS CFO are going to come up first versus just CFO. So I'd say really spending time instead of, a lot of times people will put just like the name of their company, what they're doing, their title, and then nothing about what they're doing. Again, that's where all the search comes from. So the more that you spend time in putting there and the more keywords that are like within your industry are going to be, more easily, more discoverable. And then being part of those groups as well. But also, like I said, some being present. And I'd say if you're a C-level exec, writing original content is huge too. writing something content and specific to your industry, that really gets a look, and posting those in groups, being part of groups. A lot of people don't think about when you post, you can also tag you probably see mine, Melissa. And I think you probably do the same thing. When I post, I use that post, I repost that thing probably 10 to 12 times, but I just tag different groups. So for me, for instance, if I post a controller job today, I post it on my main feed, but then I go back and I share it directly to the Texas CPA group, CPA Society. So when you do a post and you do something that's original content that you think people are interested in, it's working smarter, not harder. Take that post and reuse it 10 to 15 times, tagging in those groups that would speak to you. Not only are people going to get people you might start networking with, people you haven't before, but it's also a way to really dig up potential job opportunities too for recruiters like myself looking for you. Again, make sure you're staying in groups that are relevant to yourself. I think the other place that being consistent and keep your title what your title is. I mean, I just been doing this for 18 years. Honesty is always the best policy. And don't create 15 different versions of your resume. Again, it's, here specifically in Austin, I think in any market, you can oversaturate the market with your resume pretty easily, more than you would think. And if you don't think hiring managers and CEOs and CFOs and CEOs talk, they do. They talk about, oh, Melissa and I'd be like, oh, I got 3 different versions of Melissa's resume for 4 different roles at my company. That's a little concerning because they're the same person, 3 different versions, 3 different roles. I'm not even talked to this person, but clearly they don't know what they want to do, and I'm not really looking for that. I'm looking for somebody who knows who they are, knows their brand, knows what they're looking for, and so being very strategic about that. And I think that's an easier conversation with people who are employed or passive candidates, but I do speak to a lot of people who are unemployed, and I know you have to work, but being more strategic. I always kind of give them homework. I say in the morning, pick the 4 or 5 jobs. Companies want to see where you can add value from day one, hands down. Whether that's industry relatable for sure, especially if you spent a good period of time in one specific industry, that's definitely going to speak to them. So look for the 3 or 4 jobs that you want, apply to those, and then switch that in the afternoon. Take more of a proactive approach. Instead of just blindly submitting resumes, go to the industries or the companies that you want to work for and directly approach someone. And not in an overbearing way, just saying, hey, I see that you're working at XYZ company. I have 10 to 15 years of experience in this space. I'm not really sure if you're looking to hire, but I'd love to have it, if anything, we can have talk about, talk shop about, your particular industry. And you'd be surprised how much more of a casual approach that opens up than just, trying to apply for, if you try to apply for 15, 20 jobs, like I said, especially I think in any market, but specifically in this market, people will literally say, you know what, I don't know what's wrong with that person, but they're really applied for 15 jobs at our one company. And so clearly they don't know what they want and the resumes are different and, all those kind of things. So I think staying true to yourself and true to your brand, but taking a little bit of a different approach in both ways instead of just applying to postings and kind of reversing that a little bit. I know that really resonates. It resonates with me because people do that with me too. They'll reach out to me and say, hey, I saw that you're with an executive search firm. I don't really know what you have yet. I'm not applying to a posting. I'm just ready to start my search. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about market or what you're seeing out there. I would say I probably place 20% of the people I work with, not because the company has a job order, but because I know what the company looks for in candidates from a culture perspective. And I know when someone has industry experience where I'll, reach out and say to a hiring manager I've known for 10 years, I don't know if you're hiring, but I know from working with you before what you're looking for in candidates. And this person's got 10 years of industry related experience in your space. Is this someone you might be interested in speaking with? There's a good chance that either they're just interested in the candidate, which is always a good conversation. Now you have another C-level contact in your market, which is never a bad day. Or there's a role that they're getting ready to kick off next quarter, but now they're going to move up that timeline because you already live there. So I think taking a 2-pronged approach versus just waiting for some perfect job posting to pop up, especially in the C-level world. So I would say I just picked up a CFO search this morning. I'm not posting it, because it's a retained search, right? I don't think people understand C-level searches for the most part, you're not going to find those online. Those are going to either be through a retained search firm or a confidential search. So, you creating that network is where you really dig those up. If a company thinks they're going to get their next CEO by posting a CEO job online, you might want to question working for that company. So, because I know the only reason that I post in this market is so that people can tie me to this brand. That's not really where we get our candidates for the most part. For the most part, we're really target recruiting people. But I think that at the C-level, you got to do a little legwork on the front end to create those networks and those connections. I think if you talk to most C-level execs, that's typically where often the opportunities come from.
Yeah, I agree. Just one thing came to mind. So I know you've been staffing and recruiting for many, many years. What are the top skills that I know that's a bold question because there's hundreds of skills out there. Like in the world of hiring today, what are the top skills employers are looking for? Whether it's a C-suite role or a VP role or a director role, what are those top skills they're looking for in a potential candidate?
Do you mean more, because my world is specific to accounting and finance, do you mean like specific skill sets or like newer, like things like ESG that are out there? Like ESG is like a big one, right? Like even in my world, like, being an ESG controller, which is, employer sustainability, I always have to remind myself, employer sustainability, environmental, social, and governance. Like that's become, and depending upon what industry, like I have a company here in town that's going to be looking for an ESG controller. And obviously that's the accounting and finance world, but it's all tied directly to the impact that company specifically is having on the environment. So that's kind of a newer one. I mean, that's even a newer one for me. Like, yeah, I love this business because you always have to learn new things. I heard a little inkling of it last year, but because we don't have the larger publicly traded companies here in Austin, that's where you're going to typically find them. There wasn't a majority of them, but now I've heard about 2 or 3 this year. So I'd say that's one area. AI, of course, right? I mean, AI is just kind of a way to go. Skill sets as far as C-level goes. I mean, being tech savvy up on new. I mean, I can speak probably more to my world as far as being on any type of ERP system or ERP platform, more than just a QuickBooks scenario. Is going to always be good. The go-to here in Austin is NetSuite for sure. But I'm working with a company right now that is going through a conversion to SAP for HANA. And literally they need someone who's an accountant, but also is tech savvy in the implementation of SAP for HANA. If you know anyone, let me know.
That's my point is I have some friends that are currently looking for C and VP roles and they say they've sent me some of these jobs descriptions and they're like, they're looking for unicorns, like a very specific unicorn. And so it's just funny because I see some of these job descriptions with friends of mine that are interviewing and they're like, yeah, you have to like very specific role, very specific time. And so, but any final thoughts, like maybe top 3 things that potential candidates in any field can do to enhance their ability to be more either likable on social or better with their resume? I guess any closing thoughts?
I mean, I think the biggest thing, and I gave this presentation the other day, and it's one they've asked me to do like 4 or 5 times. I think the biggest, what I hear when, like in my mind, when I submit candidates to a job, I in my mind test myself to say, I wonder how they're going to rank them, right? And I wonder who they'll choose. And sometimes, a lot of times I'm kind of on point, but a lot of times more often I'm on point, but the time that I'm not, it's because my candidate didn't prepare or take the time to prepare. Like it's like anything. And that's the biggest thing that I hear about companies when they pass on a candidate where I'm like, wow, you passed on that candidate? I kind of thought that was a ringer, right? And they're like, Laurie, he or she didn't know about anything about the company. They didn't know anything relevant. So I think really, truly what the deal breaker is, companies will hire anybody's 9 times out of 10 on culture fit, passion over technical any day of the week. So make sure, and you as a candidate, I think your ability to tie yourself to the mission, to the product, to the service will make your job not always feel like so much of a job. So I think it's a win-win for both. But do your homework, do your research. Don't try to cram the night before. I mean, when I prep our candidates, we prep our candidates days before. We do a lot of legwork for them because they're working. So we do a lot of it. But do your due diligence. Know about, if you're not good on an engaging conversation, don't bring 10 questions, bring 15 questions. Know something relevant about the industry. Know something, see if you know other people that work there. If you know you're uncomfortable talking to someone, go look on their LinkedIn profile, see where they went to school, see where they were raised. You just don't want that weird, awkward silence because again, then you have that lack of engagement. And in a role where you have to be cross-functional, or especially in C-level roles where that's just inherent, and you have to be able to work and know your audience and work across the organization and literally be very visible. You've got to have that two-way, like knowing your audience, but being able to speak to it in a way that people understand is really important. And I'd say that's probably the biggest complaint I get from the biggest reason that clients push back on a candidate that on paper is purely qualified, but literally hasn't taken the time to prep or really, and things like don't answer what is your weakness with a strength. Oh God, like don't do that. God, like what is your weakness? Oh, I work a lot. Okay, no. Don't do that. It was like the biggest thing. Like everybody has a weakness. I don't care what it is. Mine's listening. I'm working on it, right? So, for me, like I'm always thinking about the next thing I want to say instead of like trying to make sure I'm being present and being in the moment with the person. But it's usually because I'm really excited about what they're talking about, which isn't a bad thing, but you've got to be a little bit more self-aware of those things. Yeah. So don't answer, your strength, your weakness is a strength.
I love that. It's so true though. And I think getting to know people, not just for the role, but who they are, like what are their characteristic traits? What are their personality traits? What are they like? Typically how they engage. You can pull some of that information outside of just their resume. And yeah, it baffles me, Laurie, that people still, I've interviewed many times where people had no idea what our company did.
I know.
Anything. And I'm blown away by that. If you want a job or you want anything, whether it's anything, you would do some research on it. And you're right. As a hiring manager, the minute that they have no idea about anything that we do or the company, like they're absolutely not even to the next step, because that is basic thing that they should be doing.
And it really blows me away because I've literally prepared them for it. Like here, like the night before, like here's the company, here's recent articles. I know they're working, right? So they're coming home, they're working, my passive candidates. And then it's like the last thing you want to have to do is read books on the outside when you get home, right? So and the fact that they actually didn't do that, it tells me a lot about them. They're not really serious about making a change. They're probably a huge counteroffer risk to stay with their current company for that reason. Like maybe they're just trying to negotiate an offer with another company to get a better one than where they are. They're not really committed to the process. So it definitely questions whether I'm going to, actually work with them going forward. Also in the interview process, you have to really emotionally prepare. If you're coming from a situation that's negative or toxic, you got to stay PC, and you sometimes have to really emotionally prepare that. I don't care how great of a camaraderie you feel with somebody that you're hiring, that you just met 30 minutes ago. They're trying to see where is Melissa going to be dramatic? Like, where, like they're trying to get to pull you into that. So don't, make sure you stay, and they might even try to drill down on that and say, hey, listen, you checked off the box. I really would love to know why you're looking to leave. Say, it was just time, I've been there for a while. I kind of outgrew my role. The culture kind of shifted. I just didn't fit there anymore, those kind of things. But don't all of a sudden be like, hey, just because you feel a good rapport with the person, they're trying to see, because that's the last thing they want on their team is someone who's going to create what they consider, that banter of drama and everything else. Right. And
the other thing I was thinking that just popped in my head, I've been on interviews where people are like this, their hands are on their head, or their body language. And I think that's another thing, like smile, you're not going in for a root canal. Show them your personality. I've had multiple times, like I'm like, really, am I that engaging where you're and so be mindful of your body language. It sends a message to the person that's talking. And if you're nervous or you don't understand the question, ask, would you mind repeating this? Or what do you mean about this question? And I think people that are interviewing appreciate that. Maybe they didn't ask the question right and they want to get your answer. But I'm always baffled when people do, like, can you hold on 1 minute? I got to take this call. Like, I'm like, are they serious? So these kind of things are common sense, but not always common.
Yeah, and staying clear and concise to the point, right? Like especially C-level for sure. Most C-level execs don't care how you got to the bottom line. They just want to know what the bottom line is, right? And if they want you to expand, they'll ask you to expand. But don't get to answer the question first. And then if they'd like you to expand on that topic, great. But stay clear, because again, it's going to tell them, how's my internal communication with Melissa? Is Melissa going to be one of those people that's like, hey, I need a minute? And it's more like, 50, 60 minutes, right? Like those kind of things. So I think really sticking to that when you're talking and really making sure back to staying in the moment, because often an interviewer or a hiring manager is testing you. They may say something earlier in the conversation And if you're not really paying attention, they may circle back at the end and ask you what you thought about that or how you related that to some other aspect of your career. And if you're not really paying attention and really in the moment and really staying engaged, you won't even know what they're talking about, right? And so, and I think really make it easy on yourself. Have your resume there, write down questions, tell them, say, hey, I like some of the things you're saying. Do you mind if I take notes? That way they know it doesn't look like you're distracted. You're just taking notes on what they're saying. That's not always a bad thing. I always tell candidates ask first so that they don't think you're just like writing something else. But like I said, I think it's just, some of this is just common sense. I mean, even on attire, wear what you would normally wear to a professional interview. I don't know how other way to explain that. And I've actually prepared, if you want to share with the audience, I'm fine with that. I've prepared a PowerPoint on the 3 different types of interviews and how to prepare for them differently, because a phone interview is one of the hardest interviews ever, because they can't see you. They can't see any they can't see your face. They can't see it. I think phone interviews are really hard. And I think they're also, I always try to deter my hiring managers from ruling someone out just based on a phone interview, because I do think that doesn't give you anything about the soft skills, telling someone to smile, all those. It's really hard. And even to even an inflection in your voice sometimes. But also we have one that's virtual and then an on-site one. And I have these tips and traits about preparing for them and those kind of things, because they're all very different. And I think some people are comfortable in front of a camera, some aren't. So practice. So don't make it a dry run the first time you've been interviewed, because the last thing you want to do is a hiring manager say, I really liked everything about Melissa. I liked her resume, but she was kind of awkward on screen. She was like, and then you'll be kicking yourself, because you're like, what, if I just practiced that a couple times, like with my family, my friends, gosh, is that the reason that, again, they're looking for the little differences between you and someone else who prepared much better.
I love it. All good information. We'd love to share any extra information. Laurie, I love talking to you. You always have so much great information. And the speed at which you can get it all out is amazing.
Northeast. I'm from the Northeast originally. I'm not a born and bred Texan, but I've been here for 20 years. That's probably a bad excuse.
I love it. I follow all of it. Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate all your insights and all the information you shared with our listeners. Connect with Laurie. She is always willing to help. And until next time, thanks for listening to the Executive Connect podcast.
Thanks, Melissa. I appreciate it.